Brain science is extraordinarily young science, and there's no doubt that some of the proximate causes of presumably things like obsessive thinking, craving, and so on is a complicated psychobiological response. And the reason I just say psychobiological is that it involves the whole body. Again, the lessons of Ozempic and these other GLP-1 drugs show the importance of the whole metabolic system. And of course, again, people in alcohol addiction studies, some of them will talk about the importance of sugars and carbohydrates. So that's got to be a contributing thing, but that's metabolic. It's not brain. Sure, it involves the brain. It goes to the brain eventually, but it involves the entire body.
Today's guest is Dr. Owen Flanagan. He is a renowned philosopher at Duke University, and his work spans consciousness, morality, addiction, shame, and the nature of the self. While Owen built an impressive academic career exploring the mind and ethics, he was privately struggling with addiction himself. Owen brings a rare blend of deep personal experience and philosophical insight into the topic of addiction. In this conversation that we had between Owen and me and today's guest host, food addiction expert and therapist Vanessa Kredler, we explore more deeply his book. It's an excellent book called What Is It Like to Be an Addict? Understanding Substance Abuse. Without further ado, here's our conversation with Dr. Owen Flanagan. Owen, thank you so much for being here today.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, Christina.
Vanessa and I have just recently read your book, What Is It Like to Be an Addict? Understanding Substance Abuse, which is the latest of, I think you have what now, 12 or 13 published books available?
Approximately.
Too many to keep track of.
Right.
This was really interesting to us as being people interested in eating disorder recovery, addictive patterns with food, compulsions around food. And yeah, it's a very, very unique and fresh look that is very integrative and multidimensional. And just personally, one of the things that I really liked is your focus as a philosopher, your focus on phenomenology. So like in my past, I've been really interested in phenomenology, and actually for my dissertation that I published, which was on coping with urges to binge eat, I did do a lot of deep diving on cravings and urges, and specifically the phenomenological aspect, sort of like somatic aspects of cravings. Like, how are people interpreting this experience? Not necessarily on the cognitive level, I was more interested on the somatic level. And I love that you did do a lot of stuff throughout your book on phenomenology and craving. I'd like to ask you, Owen, how do you understand craving, not just as a brain state, but as a felt experience? Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So my interest in the experience of addiction to the individual who is the addict, and we'll talk later about maybe what constitutes addiction, or whether it's a matter of degree or it's really a distinctive kind of experience. But well, first of all, you and your listeners should want to know I was addicted to alcohol and to benzodiazepines for about 20 years, and I haven't had either one in 18 years now. But it was a struggle. It was a real struggle. And what I found along the way is that although I of course had therapists, psychiatrists, and social workers, and so on and so forth, who were very, very helpful, and I could tell they were giving me the state of the art understanding and strategies for overcoming my addiction. I often did feel, even though I was around empathic people, that they didn't quite get what it was like inside me all the time. And I used to talk about weather patterns in me and things like that. I couldn't tell whether I'd wake up to a bright and sunny day or a dark and stormy day, and I didn't know how long it would last. But of course, one of the distinctive features, at least in my case, of addiction was the extraordinary power of cravings,
Hmm.
unpredictability of cravings. And one thing I could start with, actually, since I'm looking right at you, reminds me of some story I used to tell. So when I did finally get sober, it was a struggle. I couldn't go more than 2 or 3 minutes sometimes if I was awake without having a strong craving. When I finally did get sober, it took me, people would be happy for me. They would say things like, "Oh, it's good you're back, so lucky that you haven't had a drink in 3 months." But if I was talking to you, Christina, I was thinking about vodka.
Hmm.
I was present in one sense, like that is I could carry on a conversation. It's a little bit like multitasking. I
Hmm.
could do things like do my job, teach my students. But if I was awake for a very, very long time after I had my last drink, in particular, I was obsessing about it.
Hmm.
And it wasn't just sort of pure mental focus on my drug or drugs of choice, but it was a very active, completely fully embodied, full on craving desire for the object of my lust. It wasn't as if that I was confused about what I wanted. I wanted something quite specific, ethanol, to bring into my body.
Hmm.
And so I thought it was important to talk about that, among other things, about what it's like from the inside, how unpredictable the cravings can be. Although they do become, at least in my case, they became predictable at a certain point. For example, in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, there's an introduction written by Dr. Silkworth. Now, he was not himself alcoholic, but he's very confident, says that cravings occur after you take the first drink.
Hmm.
And my view is that they occur in at least three places, minimally. I mean, I get what he's talking about because we often say, at least we say this with my drug of choice, you have a little bit of latitude and distance between yourself and the first drink
Hmm.
or drug. But then after that, all bets are off until you stop. The
Hmm.
binging will go on.
Hmm.
And so there's craving that precedes the first drink. Then there's it sustains the craving. And then, of
Hmm.
course, the next day, at least in my case, at the end, if I was awake, I needed to use, and I would use. I would wake up first thing, and that looks like a kind of again, it has the same phenomenology. It's a powerful craving for the drug of choice, but it seems to be a very, very, sort of a visceral bodily need to take this thing because, uh, well, you're just gonna you know, so I thought that it was important to talk about the different places in the sort of the sweep of a day of addiction that cravings can occur. And so that was one of my thoughts, that was helpful information from the insider point of view.
Owen, I so relate to everything you said. Also, identifying as somebody with multiple addictions, both substance and behavioral. And, you framing in your book, you're framing this phenomenon of craving as overpowering, sorry, not always overpowering, right? But
Right.
ever present, ever ready.
Yep.
And for me, in my experience, it can be so compulsive. Like it's almost like a form of neurodivergence or OCD. It's like it's not really a desire. It's more like this compulsion, like this sort of tick where I'm like, I've got to reach up for it. Do you relate to that?
Yeah, totally, Vanessa.
Mm,
When I first, I totally thank you for that. Exactly. So there were, I mean, I'm quite interested in following up exactly the suggestion that you said, which is what is, we have all these, attempts to neatly divide all these various ailments that we can have, or the
mm,
disorders, or various ways in which, so people would like it if it was neat and tidy, that there's OCD over here, and there are compulsions over here, and there's
mm,
addictions over here. But they sure do seem, in my case, to be there's the obsessiveness of thought, and then the
yes.
compulsive desire to use. And in terms of I remember just finding it bewildering at first that I had a period of 7 years of sobriety, but I didn't seek any help from anyone. I just did it cold turkey.
Mm,
And it was very difficult. But then when I went back out after 7 years of sobriety, and I'm happy to talk about what happened then, I almost immediately noticed that I would sort of be driving along thinking that I wasn't thinking about using, and then suddenly my car is turning into the gas station where I
Yes.
buy. And so, yeah, that's another important point, because it's a kind of a, isn't it? There's a very distinctive kind of, oh yeah, I'm thinking about it. I need this particular thing. I need to find the vodka or the beer or the wine, always in large quantities. But other times it's just kind of you're humming along, but this
Mhm.
sort of background orientation is delivering you right to the poison that you think you don't seek. Yes, so there's a sort of automaticity to it almost, and breaking that habit was hard.
Absolutely right, because we don't know what, when we can't see it, when we can't make out where is the trigger point, it's very difficult to address that, isn't it?
Exactly right. Exactly right. And one comes to know, I would think. I mean, I know this because I have, I do say in the book, of course, as you know, that I'm talking about substance addictions. I exclude food partly because I'm so interested in talking to you guys. I find
Mhm.
it so mysterious and unusual in certain ways, of course, because unlike, I mean,
Mhm.
one doesn't need vodka or benzos to survive. One does
Mhm.
need food. And so,
Mhm.
abstinence rules or abstinence approaches just won't work for food. I'm well aware of that from having spoken to, experts about it. So I leave
Mhm.
it to the side, but I'm very, very interested in it because I, like a lot of people, know that I can't just eat one of those things. There are many things in that category where if I take it, then it's gone. Whether it's
Yeah.
a pint of ice cream or, so the carb and the sugar thing, it gets me going right away. And that is a case where it's interesting. I wonder what your thoughts are too about that. Not that I'm interviewing you guys, but the Silkworth idea that once you take the first drink, then the craving sets in. I'm actually more familiar with that with food than I
Uh-huh.
am with drink. That I
Yeah.
know I just need to stay away from certain things because it's
Yeah.
all bets are off if I start.
That's so interesting because, I think you were just saying, with food, abstinence is sort of, it doesn't quite work, right? Because we have to eat. But
Right.
it seems like you've got your own experience also of, I can abstain from certain foods, maybe because they set off the very strong desire
Yeah.
or compulsion to go back, right? Whereas other foods might not, or particular eating behaviors we might need to abstain from. Can you relate to that?
Oh yeah, totally, totally.
Yeah.
Now
Mm.
it turns out that I just have been lucky that I didn't have to. I mean, I'm famous for my ice cream desires, but I have to be strategic about it. I will, if I have a pint of ice cream or even two, I will eat it all.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
so I have to be strategic, and I even have to ask my wife, remind her not to bring, don't buy any ice cream today. It's not a big deal with us. But the point is, and we're about to have guests, so this coming weekend there'll be ice cream, and I'll be happy, and I'll eat a lot of it. But then
Mhm.
I'll stop it, and but it doesn't have the same. Yeah, it just luckily doesn't have the same grip on me that I need to do it all the time. Perhaps I fit more. I mean, it's an interesting question again, we don't know in alcohol addiction what to do with people like college students who, as it were, just really binge a lot,
Yeah.
because it doesn't look like they have all, if you take just something like the DSM-5, just not that that's authoritative, but as you know, there are 11 or so symptoms that could, if you have like, a few, three or more, then you're in the moderate category, five or six or more, you're in the severe category. And binging just doesn't add up usually to anything even moderate or severe. But it's a huge public health problem because three-quarters of the monetary costs of alcohol use are by people who are not addicts. So,
Mhm.
but binging is a thing, and I have trouble thinking that it's completely caused by the atmospherics of, say, college. It seems like something more fundamental is going on. What it is exactly is kind of mysterious.
Yeah, to me, that reminds me of the parts of your book where you talk about different etiologies and different contributing factors to people's issues. Actually, I have a quote here because I like wrote down some of your quotes because I love referring to the actual quote. You said,
Sure.
You said this is a lesson from cancer analogy. Modern cancer treatments are particularized to the kind of cancer the person has. There's every reason to think that addiction treatment will be the same for addicts without any antecedent psychological problems and whose addictions do not involve a social lifestyle, for example, private addiction to prescription Oxycontin. Undoing the behavioral habit might be sufficient for undoing the addiction, but for addicts with antecedent psychological problems or addicts for whom addiction is partly constituted by a lifestyle, unseating the behavioral habit might only undo an aspect or feature of the addiction. And I think that's so important is like everyone's got these challenges with whatever sort of substance use or, compulsion or just even like a bad habit that they have. And we tend to compartmentalize and say, hey, this is caused by X or all of this is the same. But as you're saying, some people have different relationships to their behavior. They don't necessarily consider it a problem or an addiction, whereas other people have the exact same behavior, but they consider it to be like the gravest, thorn in their side for their entire existence. Some things are maybe caused by trauma. Some things might be more neurochemical, and I think the challenge is how do we decipher how do we decipher all those things?
That's exactly right. Yeah, so that's very helpful. I mean, not my quote is very helpful. You reminding me of these thoughts. It's very helpful. So yeah, it's the I mean, this is where one of the one of the really unfortunate things that happened, and I've been watching this for a long time just because of my general work in the philosophy of mind from way back before I knew that I would be mentally challenged in the way that I was first personally. I was very interested in neuroscience. I was maybe one of the first philosophers of mind who was also actively studying neuroscience. But I saw that there was this real danger of a kind of reductive, everything is the brain
Yeah.
problem. In 1997, James Leshner wrote this paper, famous in addiction circles, called alcohol and drug addiction circles, called Addiction is a Brain Disease and It Matters. And he was
Mhm.
the head of the National Institute of Health at the time. And what ended up happening was that led not only to a very, very narrow view of a midbrain mutiny, the
Mhm.
dopaminergic system going bazooey, and that was where the sort of, as it were, if there is a disease or disorder, that's where it is. And I think
Yeah.
one of the important things that you'll find out from people like you who are in this field, talking to addicts, I know I'm speaking to the choir here, is that first of all, with respect to, again, food seems like a great example, along with alcohol in my case. There was nothing in my family of origin secretive about the pleasures and the celebratory nature of alcohol. I mean, every baptism, every confirmation, every birth, every death, dad coming home at nighttime for a cocktail, but always before dinner, which in my family, there were 8 of us. We all sat down together every night. It was so so these were part among the best things in life. They still, I mean, they are for many people still, and hopefully,
Right.
but the point is that that's an important fact because one's identity then becomes
Yeah.
associated with the rhythms of an eating and celebratory life.
Right.
And so that's where getting rid of the behavior alone is just not gonna, well, it's gonna require the person giving up certain things that she is really attached to at
Right.
that
Mhm.
point. And then what we learned, of course, from the brain science now, although no one says it enough, is that I read an article yesterday in the New York Times about using contingency management techniques with people with methamphetamine addicts, actually paying them money. But the article says money works, but drugs don't work. And the reason they give again is because they say the dopamine system is just decided that methamphetamines are as good as the best sex you ever had, the best sunrise that ever happened, the best love of, and so on and so forth. But although it's true that methamphetamine and cocaine stimulants do a lot of activation of the dopamine system, Mo food doesn't. I mean, it sort of does a little bit because everything is in the mix. But cocaine and cannabis, I mean, cannabis and heroin and alcohol, they just activate about, as I say in the book, 18 parts of the brain, and probably on the order of almost all 50 to 100 neurotransmitters. So we're just there's just no particular neurochemical involved, and the ones that we can track just they vary substance by substance. So this is one reason why, again, even if you're going to have drugs that help mitigate craving, and we're already seeing this. Of course, you're seeing this with Ozempic, which affect metabolic peptides, GLP-1. And now that's interesting, and that's really important, and that's very helpful, obviously. And you also have these opiate substitutes, which not only help people reduce their desire and cravings for opiates, they also seem to help people reduce the desire and craving for alcohol and other drugs too. But those are none of them are working on the dopaminergic system. And whether that helps you or not will depend a lot on how embedded your addiction is in a lifestyle and your social relations, and also whether, to bring up the third part, I mean, we had lifestyle and brain states, also how and whether or not the etiology involves things like trauma or bipolar disorder, where you get on the order of 50 to 60% of people who are bipolar abusing drugs. Actually, 50% of those abuse alcohol. So these are all like really interesting and important empirical pieces of information to have our eye on, but they're not all the same. They're not remotely the same. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I 100% just love everything that you're saying, Owen. I think it brings such a fresh and nuanced view of addiction, very different than the view that Vanessa and I are kind of familiar with, being sort of like a more dominant paradigm right now. For example, it's said a lot like, oh, that I have food addiction, it's a brain disease. However, you reject those claims that there is an exclusive way of characterizing addiction, that it cannot be, that it should not be essentialized. And I love that you just the diverse viewpoint that you bring, and you say, for example, that the neuroscience alone cannot be essentialized, that the neuroscience alone is complex and deals with at least 18 different areas of the brain. And I'm just curious, how do you see brain science contributing to or actually limiting our understanding of addiction?
Yeah, so great question. So let's start with the limit part, and then I'll say a little bit about the the advantageous part. So basically, the limit part is simply this: that we humans are, well, first of all, just take the body itself. The body, we're not just brains in a vat, we're brains in our own particular body with its own particular history. And brain science is relatively new. It's only 125 years ago or so that the first neurons were stained so that we could even see, what neurons were like. And that was in non-human animals. So, brain science is extraordinarily young science. And there's no doubt that the some of the proximate causes of presumably things like obsessive thinking, craving, and so on, is a complicated psychobiological response. And the reason I just say psychobiological is that it involves the whole body. Again, the lessons of Ozempic and these other GLP-1 drugs show the importance of the whole metabolic system. And of course, again, people in alcohol addiction studies, some of them will talk about the importance of sugars and carbohydrates. So that's got to be a contributing thing, but that's metabolic. It's not brain. Sure, it involves the brain. It goes to the brain eventually, but it involves the entire body. But why would we think that, given that we are also antecedently think that trauma, many people who show up in psychiatric offices have trauma and are using drugs in various self-medicating ways. This is kind of an old view, but it's just obvious that it's true. There are other people who have other kinds of comorbidity, not traumatic comorbidity, but as I say, I mean, the rates of addiction to nicotine in particular among schizophrenics are astronomically high. And again, you think only 1% of the population is schizophrenic, but they have about a 90% addiction rate of some sort or other. I'm including cigarettes. People with bipolar disorder, I already mentioned the 50 to 60% rate. People with attention deficit disorder. So you have this extraordinary rate of comorbidity with respect to alcoholism and addiction. But that's not all. You also have environments which, in various ways, endorse certain drugs of choice. So I grew up in just a typical American Irish Catholic family. You know, dad was in the Second World War. Have you seen, Mad Men or Revolutionary Road, the movie? This is, men in fedoras coming home at night to drink with their families, or and then go off the next day and work hard. So these are, all the different ways in which this is an unusual kind of disease, if it is a disease at all. I prefer to call it disorder because it's an agent is undermining what he or she wants to do with it. She knows she wants to do, such as like graduate from high school or get a job after college, but the behavior is undermining that. So there looks like a disorder of choice. In rooms of alcoholics, at least, when anyone does bring up the brain addiction story, which not too many people do, although they do call it a disease very often, they usually analogize it to type 2 diabetes, which is an interesting analogy because it's presumably you're vulnerable if you have a certain kind of body to type 2 diabetes. But unlike type 1 diabetes, which you're, as it were, born with, type 2 diabetes develops, for a host of reasons, which the person then herself can make adjustments to, say by, and there's a whole bunch of different ways, including changing diet, exercise, taking these new GLP-1 drugs, and so on and so forth. So I think the key is that we just look at the phenomenon and we can see that it's much broader and more encompassing at the psychological level, psychobiological level than just the brain parts, and it has led to a dearth of funding, at least in America, for people who, if you start out a grant proposal without anything other than a catechism type answer to addiction is a brain disease, and then you can go on and ask for money. But if you don't say that, you're not going to get the money. And again, if you look at what people in various communities are addicted to, you also see all kinds of social causes. Now, this is now on the positive side, it may just be the case, and it is likely the case, that you can't instantly, for particular individuals, undo their life history or the social or relational causes or things that activate their use. So that's why it's tempting to think, okay, I will look for drugs. But what are you looking for drugs for? Well, you're looking for drugs typically, to go back to our first question, that mitigate the craving. You're not trying to knock out the disease of addiction. You almost always need therapeutic support, various anonymous communities, various fellowships. You need, social workers, psychologists, psychotherapists to help you with a whole bunch of tasks that you'll have before you once you get a control of your substance. But clearly, mitigation of craving will be very helpful, and we're seeing more and more drugs for that. They will have to be designed probably or drug by drug, as opposed to there just being one great anti-craving drug. Although again, you guys know more about this than I do. Watching what people say about the GLP-1 drugs, it looks like there's some effect on all desires from what I hear. But again, I'm no expert. And I'm, helping people sort of get the feeling from the inside that at least it's possible not to act every time you have a craving to use immediately. So that's sort of broadly where I think it was inevitable that a young science where we do have every reason to believe it's the most important organ in our body. It probably isn't the most important organ. The heart would probably be more important, but you need all the organs. And notice they all serve different functions. Liver serves some functions, kidneys serve some functions, gallbladder serves some functions, and your stomach and your intestines. And of course, there's your brain, and the brain has many functions also. But I don't think thinking of it all inside an individual, it also makes us look away from the sort of social causes of these things. And we see clearly where you live and where you grew up, what the other kids, cool kids were doing when you were growing up. These are all sort of social causes for various things. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so rich and such a wonderful contribution to, the broader addiction story, which is so much more nuanced than what we hear and learn. When we learn about food addiction or when we share about food addiction, there is that narrative, it's a brain disease and, the drug is the substance X, right? And I remember in your book, you were saying, you were looking specifically for, specific molecules, right, related to your addiction to alcohol, to benzos,
Yeah.
but they're different molecules, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it got me thinking also, like, again, looking at my own sort of landscape of multiple addictions. There, what about behavioral addictions? Because, I can be love addicted, I can be work addicted, I can be, I don't know, a gambler,
Yeah.
let's say, or something like
Yeah.
that. Where's the molecule, right?
No,
What is that
totally
all about?
right. Exactly. Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much, Vanessa. Yeah, no, exactly right. I mean, we should have known from the get-go, if we were thinking clearly about things, that you know we affect each other like all the time. Like if I say, let's meet for lunch today at, and I name the store. Well, that's enough information that you get up and go to the store. We didn't exchange, like I didn't. None of my molecules touched any of your molecules. you know I mean, but we can process language and things happen, and of course in our brain, and these behavioral addictions, clearly there's no molecular substance which is distinctive, as opposed to ethanol versus cannabinoid versus meth. There's just like there's activity. You're doing some bunch of things,
Mhm.
and you're in a certain environment, and suddenly you find you're love addicted or you're gambling addicted. The gambling addiction literature is really quite interesting. There's a wonderful book, and I'm not going to remember the name of the author. It was based on her dissertation, called Addiction by Design, Las Vegas Gambling Casinos, and how
Ah,
they're designed literally to capture our attention. And it's a fantastic book. It made me think so much, first of all, about if bad actors want to get people addicted, there's all kinds of good ways
mhm.
to do that. And the setup of even the exits and entrances in to casinos, and the bright lights and the kind of reward systems that's used on the slot machines, which are by the far the most popular. They're not even games of, like, you know uh, mind. You just are putting money in and pulling slots. And we have these primitive parts of our nature. Probably, do Mother Nature, evolution didn't try to make us optimally. She did her best with the various tools that we have, and we have bodies that love salt. They also love fat. They also love carbohydrates. We have variously constructed nervous systems where one person will smoke pot. Like, actually, my children are like this, and it makes them paranoid. Never
Yeah.
made me those ways. I know what they're talking about, but it just doesn't do that to me. It made me, when I used to do it, made me just feel good. And the same thing with the way we metabolize, food. Just varies body by body. And as you say, there's just no molecules in these things that are not substances. And of course, for all the things, the foods, for example, that people binge on, sure, I'm sure they have certain characteristics like fat and carbohydrates and sugar and so on. There's bazillions of different molecules in different foods, so it's quite general across the board.
Absolutely. And, you know, it also makes me think about some people are addicted to certain things and others not. And so, you know, my example of that would be in my early life, I did an enormous amount of drugs of all different types,
Yeah. Yeah.
psychedelics, party drugs of all types, MDMA. And I never felt addicted to any of those drugs
Yeah.
because I just used them for mind expansion and fun, really,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so other people, you know, would have maybe become addicted to, you know, the cocaine or whatever else they were
That's
taking,
right.
but that was never the case for me. How do we explain that, right? It's so
Well,
interesting.
exactly. I mean, so there again, I think we can't. I mean, partly if we really knew enough, I guess, about metabolism, and that'll involve entire body metabolism, not just brain metabolism. Yeah, we might know why two people, you know, of roughly the same size taking this particular substance, like let's say they smoke pot together every day, and one of the person just can't stop and one can. Well, that's an interesting case, and it probably has some one part of the explanation will have to do with their particular metabolism and body, but another one will have to do with whatever the distinctive sort of rewards that the person is getting from their substance of choice. And you know, let's face it, all these things that we do tend to get addicted to are often, well, in any case, things that are comforting and do a job to serve a certain psychological purpose at first, at least. Then
Mhm.
they come maybe not to do that particular job very well. But you're absolutely right. I mean, it's always been interesting to me that I have one, my roommate from college actually, who's he's addicted to sort of anything that turned up, and I just would never see. You know, I could take gambling, I could take it or leave it. I could go into a casino with $200 once every 10 years, and I enjoy it, and it just doesn't get any grip on me whatsoever. So these are just really interesting social differences that have to do with life history, the particular kind of rewards that individuals get, and I think those are idiosyncratic. I think sitting where you guys are dealing with individuals who have addictions, I'm sure you do listen very, very carefully to find out what the particularities of a person's using, what is it about? What are they getting out of it? Or what did they once get out of it? Because I think that requires getting into their history. So um, it's not all in the head.
Do you believe that one can be born with addiction? Because again, I'm drawing on my own lived experience. I feel that that is the case for me, and I can see that in other family members as well. And I'm curious of your thoughts or your experience with that.
Yeah, good. So it's very good. It's a great question. And it's something I have to say. I continue to be agnostic on that question for several reasons, but not entirely agnostic. You see. Okay. So there's been some good twin studies on these things. So you would expect if there's a strong genetic component in addiction that identical twins adopted out and separated at birth would show signs of more than chance. And in
Mhm.
fact, that's what you get. So, for example, take something that's not an addiction, schizophrenia. Identical twins separated at birth, they'll have 50% rate. So that's a pretty huge genetic component there. But you still could dodge the bullet. And it's an interesting question that we don't know the answer to about how does that one twin dodge the bullet? And no one yet knows. And one reason is that we don't know what the genes are that predispose people to be schizophrenic. And the thought in general that people usually have is that most genes are polygenic. That means you need a bunch of different ones together to have a really powerful genetic disposition. So now, with respect to, however, people say to me all the time, they say, "Oh, well, when you know, my family of origin, everybody, maybe my
Mhm.
mother, maybe my mother wasn't, but there was a lot of other pressures besides possibly whatever genes we had from our ancestors who came over from Ireland in 1848 and 49 on both sides." Uh, Namely, we came up in families that drank back in the homeland, and they were therefore Catholics who drank after work, and they were Catholics who drank at all the, as I mentioned, all the religious ceremonies. So you had, it was almost a perfect storm. Maybe. So there might have been genes. There sure was also a lifestyle and a set of values that made this part of convivial social life. And of course, by the time I went to college, I was in college in the 60s. So using drugs like you did was de rigueur. I smoked pot every single night all through college. It was my favorite drug. I would have thought I became a pothead rather than an alcoholic, but it didn't turn out that way. Now, again, that might bring us back to thinking, that then, given the family history, but the reason I just remain agnostic is that there are genes that anyone can test for yet, that anyone knows how to test for. But you sure do see some signs that that would make you think. So what everybody talks about is a measure called hereditability, and you might think that hereditability means genetic hereditability, but actually it doesn't. So there is very high hereditability, but here's why the measure is an odd one. It's not a genetic one. So for example, if you're raised in an American family, uh, liking American football is highly hereditable. Whereas if you're raised in an Australian family, liking American football is not hereditable. So you get
That's
the
right.
idea. So it's a funny use of hereditable, and it really confuses a lot of people to think, oh, all the evidence is in that if your parents are alcoholic, you'll be alcoholic too. If they have a food abuse problem, maybe you will too, and so on and so forth. And then people say it's highly hereditable, but we don't know yet what the genes are. But we do know, for example, there are genes that have identified as causal contributors to things like breast cancer. So if we do, like the BRCA gene and things like that. So, we do testing on these things. So if there starts to be clusters of genes that are showing up reliably, and they show up, for example, in a certain people, the people who drink a lot, I don't know, the Irish people have more of it, then we'll start to think of it as, again, partly genetic, partly.
It's so interesting. I would just say, from my end, to conclude, your book and what we've just talked about, it's like it increases my own fascination with the mystery of addiction. And I almost feel like I'm addicted to the topic of addiction because I love it so much. It's so fascinating, and that we don't have all the answers. So thank you for just sort of opening up this conversation as opposed to trying to always define and solve the problem.
Thank you
Thank
very, very much, Vanessa. That's a pleasure to talk to you and Christina.
Yeah, thank you so much. I have to agree. I felt like this was a very, very interesting and unique perspective. So yeah, we just really appreciate you bringing this to our attention and to all the readers who can possibly get it. Two questions for you. One is there any just like last takeaway or message that you want to emphasize regarding the conceptualization of addiction? And second question is, where can people find this book?
Well, the book is out.
Oh, it's out
You
right
get
now.
it. You can get it on Amazon,
Okay.
and I bet the paperback will come out within about 6 months or so. But
Okay.
it's out, and it's getting some nice attention. And some people don't know what to quite to do with it, because it does. I think what's very helpful, that from a conversation with Vanessa and Christina, it was that you helped me sort of be able to say, there's just nothing really simple at all to say about addictions.
you.
They're utterly particular to individuals. We have to see them as embedded in, lifestyles and particular social contexts. There are all kinds of demands on humans to conform to what their peers are doing, that lead people in all kinds of directions to try things that are socially supported. And sometimes the things that are socially supported turn out to not be good for you as an individual. Or you have, again, as we were talking about, particular propensities, either innate, possibly due to your metabolism or to your brain states, but possibly learned. You just might have, all the habits that we learned about eating, for example, as children. I know there is a huge amount of literature, I just haven't read it, about such things. But these are contributing causes to what in particular individuals are huge existential problems that frustrate people's attempts to live well. And I think a compassionate attitude is not to think of the person before you as having a problem in a brain, although their brain is involved, but as having a problem in living a good human life.
Thank you so much for being here, Owen. It's been a pleasure to talk with you, and thanks for going a little deeper into your book. Anyone who is listening to the podcast or who's watching the YouTube video, go out and get What Is It Like to Be an Addict by Dr. Owen Flanagan. Thank you so much, Owen.
Pleasure. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
See ya. Bye.